Thanks for joining us. We're happy to have you learn more about the Quantel Paintbox through these amazing pioneers. And who we have today is, as George mentioned, Adrian Wilson, Marlene Weisman, who is the formal SNL graphic designer and Paintbox user course. And we have Rory, who's representing the Richard Bernstein estate, so hear more about that practice as well. So I'll have each of you take a minute to introduce your relationship to the Paintbox and then ask you some questions.
Oh, in 1984, the art college, photography college where I was at, was donated a Paintbox by Quantel, which pretty much changed my life. Everyone was shooting large format transparencies, so this machine arrived, and suddenly my imagination, if I wanted to move heads around, do all the things that everyone wants to do, I didn't have to go in a lab anymore. I didn't even have anyone saying you can't do that. The Paintbox would let me do it. So I just fell in love with this thing. Thankfully, all the other photographers thought it was terrible. The quality was low. It's 625 lines, so it's rubbish. I was like, no, it's not. And so yeah, I just spent the next 6 years doing album covers, magazine covers, etc. As a photographer, manipulating images. So this was kind of, I suppose, 6 years before Photoshop came out. So I was kind of doing Photoshop first as a photographer, and so that's how I ended up into the Paintbox.
And to just say a few words, and before Marlene introduces herself, people thought that the resolution of the Paintbox was low because they were used to film, which had a high resolution. So we're in between kind of people being used to high resolution digital, what's getting output to analog video, which seems lower resolution, and film. So Adrian found that niche. Marlene?
Hi, I'm Marlene Weisman. I worked at Saturday Night Live from 1988 to 1995. And when I got to NBC, the art department still had stations where the prior graphic designers had airbrush spigots. It was that much, that's where it was at. And I worked primarily with letraset, with hand lettering, with typesetting, and we even had a vinyl lettering machine and one of those big stack cameras that I felt like was almost, that's me back in the day, the size of this room. But the exciting thing that was happening as I was hired at Saturday Night Live is that one of my colleagues, Ira Rappaport, who I work with Ira and Doug Zeider, was able to make a presentation to Lorne and to NBC to show them the joys and the importance of the Paintbox. And sure enough, NBC obtained Paintboxes, and that changed everything. I mean, it was an interesting situation for me because I was working analog, but I actually worked very closely with Ira and Doug, and it was a fantastic experience watching, creating things analog, working with the writers, bringing them, I forgot if it was up to Paintbox or down to Paintbox. I think it was up to Paintbox. And then those were taken in digitally, and then with my colleagues, magic happened. It was just like an amazing experience to be there for all those years. And by the way, we didn't get Macs till like in our graphics department till like 93, 94. I mean, that was like crazy. And then when they got a Mac, we had the graphics, the computer room. So it was just such a different world, and I'm so happy to be here because it, you guys can kind of get a little insight into how it was, that transition, that's the spin I can offer you guys.
Thanks, Marlene. And Rory?
Hi everyone, my name is Rory Trifon. I am the nephew and manage the estate of Richard Bernstein. He is the artist probably best known for doing the covers of Andy Warhol's Interview magazine for nearly 20 years. But when I really discovered who my uncle was as an artist and uncovered his archives, I discovered that he was one of the pioneers of this digital technology called the Quantel Paintbox. And that's how I found Adrian, and we got connected. And really, he created this entire body of work in the early 1990s, all digitally created on the Quantel Paintbox. And really seeing it today and the capabilities and what it could do, I mean, A, it sheds light on how I view my uncle and how he was able to do this incredible artwork, and B, like what incredible technology this was at the time, and even today, to see how you could, you know, easily manipulate these really beautiful pictures and create a beautiful output. So.
Thank you all. So to get right into questions, Adrian, I'm going to throw this to you first. The Quantel Paintbox arrived in 1981, but it wasn't the first digital painting system. Xerox PARC Super Paint came out in 1973, although it was never commercial. And there were earlier systems for real-time digital painting with a stylus, like the Cytec systems in the late 70s, which were used mostly, though, for outputs that were in print. What did Paintbox do differently that allowed it to take hold in television and design studios when earlier systems hadn't?
I heard a laugh from a Quantel employee in the back there. Yeah, it's kind of strange because obviously in any technology there's always, hey, what was first, what was this? There were different people developing things at the same time. Hey, did they speak to each other? Did they interact, etc.? And Quantel was part of obviously that story. It was very unusual in the fact that it was in England, in this small town in the middle of nowhere called Newbury. So it wasn't part of like the California ecosystem or anything like that. And yeah, you couldn't say it was the first at lots of different things, but it was the first to bring everything together in the perfect way. So it was 24-bit broadcast quality. They solved the idea of what they used to call jaggies, which a lot of those early systems couldn't be used on broadcast TV because you get those jagged edges.
Yeah.
The Paintbox didn't have that. It's broadcast quality. It was real time. And also, Quantel employed 50 artists. The only people in the R&D department were technical people, engineers, and artists. So they would all feed off each other about what they need. Everything on the menu, as you probably see, it was operated by a pen. That was it. Everything says try it, do it, graphics, painting, chalking, whatever. There was nothing that you had to understand as a technical person. So it basically brought everything together beautifully. And for instance, Albie Ray Smith, who obviously worked on paint, etc., when he saw it at NAB, he was like, I don't know how they've made this so fast.
Yeah.
And for instance, the pressure-sensitive pen, which there was all sorts of pressure-sensitive pens even used for medical devices in the 60s. But Albie said, well, we invented the pressure-sensitive pen, but it just didn't really work very well. The Quantel one did.
Yeah.
So they brought everything together in this perfect package, and literally it became the global standard. Everything you saw in the 80s, or as you see on these videos, was done on the Paintbox.
Well, as you mentioned, like the color range was so great for 24-bit. I think Super Paint could only do something like 256 color palette, translate GIFs or something.
16 million, I mean,
Yeah,
you
that's
know.
a lot, big difference, yeah.
So now you couldn't obviously use all those because this is, the other thing is this is for broadcast TV. It's a very specific thing. It's not for desktop publishing, print or anything. So you'd have what they call illegal colors. So if you had a color that was too bright, your TV at home would start flickering, etc. So even though it was 16 million colors, it was actually for broadcast TV. So it was, you had to kind of be careful what you used. But it was a very niche market, and these things were $250,000. And NBC, for instance, they bought 9 paint boxes, and they, like I said on there, their designers could do something in 15 minutes that somebody else could do. You know, it'd take 2 days, and systems like the AVA, the AVA, and all these other ones, everybody dropped those for the paint box.
Totally.
It became the standard.
And I love this idea of illegal colors, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. These are, as just to reiterate, they were literally called illegal colors because they were hues that fell outside the broadcast safe range. From an artist's perspective, did this open up creative possibilities, or was it an obstacle when preparing graphics for television? And maybe you could answer this too, Marlene. Yeah.
Sure. Well, you know, Saturday Night Live, I mean, the creativity part of it versus the technical part of it, you know, that to me, you know, is a bit out of my wheelhouse. But I can talk to you about prepping the graphics, I mean, more than that. So, you know, hit me the question again.
Well,
We're talking about legal colors.
Legal, yes, yeah, I'm not, yeah.
So one thing that was interesting, when the Paintbox came out, there was nothing like it, and there were unions in the broadcast. So one thing is, there was this whole discussion about, are you an artist, you're an operator, and actually at some of the places, the engineers said, we have to operate this machine because it's an electrical device, not the designers, and you're not allowed to touch it. So there was all sorts of demarcations.
That's right.
And also, as Marlene said, it's like, when you're in a big organization like that, you've got, I mean, I have to do all this myself, and obviously John and all these people that are here, they will have support team from Quantel who could replace anything immediately. The Weather Channel, for instance, these things have to be so reliable. The Weather Channel didn't turn its Paintbox off for 8 years.
Yeah.
It was going.
And they were the first client for the
So they had the first Paintbox in America, the Weather Channel. So all that stuff that was doing, all that behind the scenes, the wiring, the technical specifications, and also formats were changing and different standards, NTSC or whatever, that was all done by engineers. So you wouldn't have been, that's like another part, just another floor of the building.
Gee, did I involve, yeah.
So for instance, this Paintbox here, it's all together in one space, but actually, if you're a Paintbox operator, there's a big machine room with, you know, millions of dollars worth of tech that's all air conditioning with guys in white coats checking levels and, you know, voltages and whatever. That was a whole different field, like you say.
But talking about constraints, Marlene, of working within SNL, during that time, I'm sure you were often designing graphics under extreme time pressure, like people coming up with skits last second, having to make intertitles for that. Were there any particular instances where the Paintbox saved the day? Any memorable last-minute fixes, or even like technological mishaps, kind of relating to what Adrian's saying?
All the time, all the time. You know, we also used to have a joke that one of the writers would run up and say, we made that 1953. You got to change it before air to 1957. And I'm thinking, that's funnier. Like, why would they? It's like, oh, okay. But you know, the show is written Monday, Tuesday. I mean, you guys probably all know this. The show's written Monday, Tuesday. There's a read through on Wednesday in the afternoon. They read through 40 sketches. I'm talking about, again, my era was 88 to 95. It's still done today. And you know, there's a big special on, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar now with how the show goes. But they do a read through of 40 sketches. Out of those 40 sketches, 14 get chosen to be made. So my day started on that show on a Thursday. I'd come into the production meeting with the director. And they run down the sketches, and they say, "Oh, we need a graphic that looks like a heavy metal album. We need a physical album. We need a sitcom that looks like it was from the '60s opening. We need a fake commercial. We need a book cover design." I mean, there was like, you're like, okay, just load them on, and we'd come out of the meeting and go, "Oh my God, all right." And then pretty soon the graphics coordinator would have come and brought us one of these. So these are, and feel free to come after and look at them, very quaintly analog graphics lists. And we would say, oh my God, look what we have to do. And we would split it up. So I would immediately take the stuff that needed to go to Paintbox and start designing it, but I didn't work on the Paintbox. I would go back to my art area and start designing stuff that would solve the problem of what I knew the writers would want. And then I would go to the writers and say, is this something this is kind of what you have in mind? Yes, that looks great, Marlene, yes. And then I would go to Paintbox. But it would look very different. Like, for example, this is a photostat. Like years ago, like this is like a graphic, all right? So this is a photostat. I hand drew this. This was inked in by me. And then I would take this, go to the guys who sat in the old graphics department all day waiting, and I have a stat, I need a stat. So they would like, all right. So they would, you know, they would like like develop this, and then I would go up to Paintbox, and then Paintbox would take this in on an animation stand. Mika taught me that's the name. Well, we would call it the Nakamichi camera. That's what we call it, because it was, I guess that was the name of it. So they would put it on the thing, you know, and then Ira and Doug, my coworkers, would go, you know, with their pen, and they would take it in, and then they said, what do we want? And I'd sit with them, and we'd make it look cool, and you know, the Paintbox gave it dimension, and the Paintbox gave it texture, or make it look shiny, or make it look, you know, metallic. But all that,
Like these.
like that, right? But all that took, as you saw, like, it was so quick with the Paintbox. Before that, like these guys would like physically airbrush art, and then that would have been taken in with in a still store. So that was the difference. It just made the show. I mean, we only had like what, 30 hours. You know, we had Thursday, the rest of Thursday, all day Friday, and all the graphics had to be locked up by 1 o'clock was the camera blocked through on Saturday, and then dresses was 8:30 at night, and everything had to be locked up, and you know, running around upstairs to the writers, down up to Paintbox, down to graphics, to the control room. It was a trip, and it was my best dream and my worst nightmare job.
Wild timelines, and we'll come back to talking about some of the specific intro titles.
Yeah.
But first, I want to ask you, Rory, that and to let everybody understand that many prominent artists were using Paintbox, including David Hockney, Richard Hamilton, Jennifer Bartlett, and Keith Haring, in the 1980s. And Richard Bernstein was among these pioneers, utilizing this advanced technology for his digital art. How did Bernstein's integration of Quantel Paintbox influence his approach to pop art? And in what ways did it distinguish his work from his contemporaries?
So I think, you know, when you look at Richard's body of work from his interview days, and even before that, so just backing up, Richard got his fine art career in 1965 really going, and then he moved to Paris and did a whole series of pill paintings in these like bright neon Technicolor colors. When he came to Interview Magazine, he translated that over into these vibrant covers for Interview Magazine. And I think with the Quantel Paintbox, I think he was able to really utilize these beautiful Technicolor images and kind of create this whole new visual language using the Quantel Paintbox. And I think for him in particular, with the interview covers, so how the process would be is a photographer, Albert Watson, Herb Ritz, would take a photo of Brooke Shields. They would give a silver gelatin print to Richard. Richard would then crop it, use the SAT machine to then enlarge it, and then Richard would airbrush, gouache, collage. It was really labor intensive. So I think when he discovered the Quantel Paintbox, he realized very quickly how easy this could be. And also, as far as, you know, really making a mistake, or, you know, there are some interview covers where Richard did 2 colorways, because he would have to present it to Andy at the end of, you know, every week and say, okay, this is, you know, the yellow or the pink, which one? But with the Quantel Paintbox, he didn't have to do that anymore. So I think that really, you know, changed his relationship with art.
But there's a question to all of you that brings up, because there's a quirk about the Quantel Paintbox in terms of editing. Many early artists that were using the Paintbox noted that it lacks an undo function. It forced them to be more deliberate, similar to traditional painting. Was there anything enjoyable about this constraint, or what are all your thoughts on that?
Well, did you get undo when you were doing the photostat and whatever? You had to do it again, right?
No, I didn't. But I do remember, like Ira saying to me, like, do we want the heavy shadow or the lighter shadow? So like, he would do a lot of alternative versions of the main thing. I do remember that.
So when the Paintbox came out, they really were pushing every bit of technology, you know, the whatever it was, 6800 chip or whatever, it was all hot, running over capacity, etc. So one of the things they couldn't do was undo, because you know, you got this frame store, you got to go back, and it's really difficult, you know, with that technology at the time. And Paul Keller, the guy who invented the Paintbox, although he's very modest about it, I asked him why there was no undo, and he said, yeah, I got asked that question regularly, and my reply was that Michelangelo got no undo with when he was doing David, and ultimately, if you were on the Paintbox, these were $250,000. You weren't an untalented person. You were like the top of your game at NBC, right? So you were like a Formula One or a NASCAR driver. If you were driving one of these, you weren't expected to be, maybe I'll do this and dither around. When you work on that thing for broadcast, as Marlene will tell you, when you're working for SNL and somebody says, I want this now, or you work on the Olympics and somebody's just won a medal, some director is shouting at you saying, okay, make career #1 medal, gold things, do this table now. You couldn't go, well, do you want this? Or hang on, I'm just going to go back 3 stages.
Yeah.
It's kind of a modern thing to have all this ability to change your mind. Yeah. And then when Paul said, 3 or 4 years later, we could do undo button, he said, everyone found workarounds. You saved it more often, or you just, your client trusted you. Hey, can you do this metallic thing? And they didn't question what you came up with. They just presumed that was the best thing that you could do. Not like now, where everyone's got an opinion about what you're doing. I think they can half do it as well.
Yeah.
So it was a different kind of era where you were, whatever trade you were in, you don't go to an electrician and say, can you just undo that wiring because I think it could go, up instead of across. So you were trusted as a creative as well. So I think that fitted into that aspect.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned at any point, but these were like $250,000 machines at first, and they were completely, it was commercial, using professional CRT monitors, so that makes a lot of sense.
But you paid, the fact is it was that just because A, it was all bespoke, and B, super reliable, etc. And you had people like John that literally, you'd jump on a plane, give you a card, everything would get fixed, etc. And also, doing something in 15 minutes that would take 2 days meant that it paid for itself.
And the SNL graphics, there was such a wide variety of needs for that. It had to look like, it could mimic so many things, so many textures, and it was so perfect because, the creativity you need at SNL is so out there. So it was like the perfect match of computer with usage, I think.
You should also point out that NBC had 9 or 12 paint boxes. But you weren't allowed to use them at SNL because they were all being used by News Graphics, and hey, we're all busy with this stuff. We're full time. Why should we let you have it?
Right, and I had to make that presentation.
You had to kind of fight to get on them because this was the thing. It was like to get on one of these was the ultimate thing you could do, and it was it wasn't special because we're special. It was just wow, we've got this machine that suddenly makes your life so much easier and faster. Can we use it as well? And everyone's like, well, no, we're all using it.
Yeah.
And even at night when you stop using it, you get your friends in and do music videos or whatever on your time off or whatever.
But I do want to talk about it for less commercial purposes as well. It's claimed that you're, really the first photographer to experiment with digital image manipulation on the Paintbox in the mid-'80s. Long before Photoshop, right? So unlike later software-based tools, the Paintbox relied on custom graphics pipeline. It was proprietary, but with hardware components dedicated to its function, which was making art. Can you talk a little about the process of using the Paintbox for your artwork?
Imagine just Photoshop now, but it was just Photoshop then. But annoyingly, you would go to a client and you'd say, hey, I can do whatever you want. And they're like, well, what can you do? And you've got to explain everything that Photoshop does now. And you can do that. Oh, really? Well, how much is it? Well, it's kind of £1,000 an hour. I think, well, our budget's like $500. Okay, well, maybe I can do something, what's your theme? And it was kind of weird. The most disappointing thing was you would get people who would say, can you make something computery? So that was a thing. You'd say all this stuff, and it could have all this, all these abilities. So imagine going to somebody with Photoshop and saying you can do all this with all these images, and then they go, well, actually, can you do it where it looks like a mosaic, like pixels?
It's pixelated.
And you'd be like, because that's computery. So you have to forget again, the Paintbox was designed to be. Paul Keller said we designed this to be transparent. So what do you mean? He said from day one it had to be transparent. The artists using it forgot they were using a computer. So when I was using it and I want to move a head around, I didn't think it was a computer or whatever. I just thought it's a tool, right? So when you got a pair of scissors and a head and you're moving it and sticking it with glue, you don't think about the scissors anymore, you think about the idea. And the Paintbox was designed for that, and it was also, you weren't meant to look at any of this stuff and go, okay, maybe that, and go, it was computerized. Most of it, you just thought, oh, these are good graphics, and that weather map looks cool, but we don't know why, but it looks better than the one that used to be magnetic letters, etc. So, and again, the 80s, you know, like Miami Vice, it's just a nice graphic, right? I mean, it's not computery necessarily, it's just nicely done. So yeah, in terms of me, as I say, it was great in a way being first, but it was also terrible because no one knew what you were doing. There was no market for digital art. I was in exhibitions, did album covers, whatever, but everyone just tried it kind of once, you know, and that was it. So by 1990, I just said, you know, I'm done, really. So I really enjoyed it, but as I say, it was just, I'm an ideas person. The tool for that idea, you know, my maxim has always been, if you remember the picture frame, it's a crap picture, right?
Almost an artist frame, I guess.
But you know, if somebody sends you a meme or a funny thing, or you see whatever, like you don't think, oh well, how many lines is it? What, you know, what codec is it, or whatever. You just think, oh, that's a great idea. And you know, people are worried about AI now. It's just another tool that's based on your idea, your prompts. That's all it is. It's a pair of scissors cutting things around.
So talking more on the other side of this too, Rory, you know, Richard Bernstein was an early adopter of digital tools. So we're talking about the tool set. Using the Paintbox for portraits as early as like 1983. Given that most artists at this time dismissed digital imaging as, say, words like uncreative and things that sound insane to us now, what was it about the Paintbox that drew him in specifically?
Well, I think with Richard, and he had a fantastic relationship with Andy Warhol, obviously, and I think they both really aligned on new technology and pushing their own art forward using many different tools. So I think when he first saw the Quantel Paintbox, he was probably mesmerized by the tool and what it could possibly do for his artwork. So I think he was just always a proponent of new tech. And
the Grace Jones, obviously. Is,
yeah. So the Grace Jones album cover, you know, she is Grace Jones, superstar. And in 1987, she had a new album, and Richard really thought that, you know, what better way to have this avant-garde artist with this avant-garde technology, and he created that album cover using the Quantel Paintbox, and they used that album cover for the music video as well. They animated the music video using the Quantel Paintbox, so that appears with that's the music video with Keith Haring and Andy and a bunch of others, so yeah.
Now, you know, like I said, it was like crazy to think of it that way, sometimes uncreative. You know, we hear a lot of us, you know, are artists that work with digital tools and understand that's not true. So now that it's not dismissed as uncreative or gimmicky, and we recognize their influence on contemporary aesthetics, do you think Bernstein's Paintbox works have been properly acknowledged as part of pop art history, or is it there's still work to be done in elevating his legacy?
Well, I always feel like there's always work to be done for Richard's legacy. I mean, I made it my mission to really, you know, get his artwork to as many people and as many eyes as possible, and have him get the recognition that he was due. I think for a lot of his career, he was overshadowed by Andy. Even with his digital artwork and the Amiga, Richard was overshadowed. So I think, you know, opportunities like this with Adrian and Tezos, I think it's, you know, an incredible opportunity for me to really, you know, get his artwork and his name out there again.
Totally. So I said we were going to talk a little bit more about specific intertitles. The one that stands out to me that you worked on was Wayne's World. So that's like where I get starstruck. Can you walk us through how that was created, specific features of the Paintbox that made these particular intertitles? We'll talk about a few more that are famous.
Wayne's World was, you know, I worked a lot with Mike Myers. Mike Myers was always down in the graphics department. He was like a one-man show. You know, a lot of the writers worked in groups, but Mike worked on his own, and he, you know, would come down, and, you know, so there was I forgot if he came down or we just heard about it. It was just on the graphic sheet from the production meeting. But oh, there's going to be a show about 2 kids in the basement, so we need to make a tacky graphic that looks like 2 kids in rockers in a basement would have. You know, so you have to think that way. So I walked over to, again, you guys gonna die. It's so funny. I walked over to the vinyl lettering machine. That one, you know, woke up the other guy who's of the 2 in the, you know, in the old school graphics department. You know, Mike, I need something from the lettering machine. Sure. Looked at the fonts, picked out the font that I thought would work. Brought it to the guy who was the show lead, who we mention a lot, Bob Pook, who is no longer with us, but and it was never Bob Pook, it was always Pook. Very big character. Anyway, I showed him the Wayne's World, what I designed, and he's like, "Great, italicize it." Oh, okay. And he goes, "You know, it needs something else." So I forgot if it was Pook or I. We put the globe on it, and we stuck that in there, and I brought it to Paintbox, and then I mostly work with Ira more than Doug, just because that's how it was. But Doug did a lot of sports too, so, and we worked on that, and then they worked hard to make that old school, like, fly around, like they had, that was like, but it was 92 Wayne's World. So that was like, in 92, like, oh, way back in the 80s. It's like, it wasn't that long ago. But they wanted that Chiron-y trail. So they did that in edit. You think they did that in Paintbox?
No, that was done.
That was done
with, like, you know, some
like
kind
an
of
old
DPE
Chiron.
kind of thing.
Yeah. So they must have done that in the edit room, and then it just stuck. And by the way, when the movie came out, which is nothing to do, you know, I mean, I worked for NBC. It's like work for hire. The movie comes out. It's like the thing that I designed. You know, I'd be like traveling all over the world. People wear Wayne's World, like baseball caps. Like, I made that, but it's like I don't have any ownership. And I noticed on the Wayne's World movie, they they unitalicized it. That's how they changed it, I guess.
It's so interesting to hear about all the ways that you're working within the Paintbox, out of the Paintbox, like how it's not all, it's a composite, like.
Well, yes, there was a transition between analog and digital. So we would pick from each world what was useful. You know, I did an album cover which was reflected in tin foil, you know, like, and people went, "Oh yeah, how do you do that digital effect?" And I'm not going to tell them it's tin foil. You know, I did a 3D head that was, you know, a fishnet stocking, you know, glowing because he wanted a computery Tron kind of thing. You know, so we were in the golden era because we could pick from those two. You know, we had a foot in each camp, didn't we, really?
That's right.
So we didn't, you know, like now we need to do anything. We go, "Oh, what app can I get for my phone?" You know, you don't think, "Oh, well, actually, could I get a pair of scissors or anything like that?" But that was our world. And I think it's, you know, as much as all this stuff, which is amazing, all the artists and interesting stuff, I think, you know, we have to remember as well that before, you know, you have to think back to the 70s where broadcast hadn't caught up with the rest of the world. You got all these video games you could play at home, you got all this digitization of all sorts of things, and broadcast was a bit late to the game because it's actually really hard to do and expensive. But actually in the 80s, all the things that you saw, whether it was that weather map, you know, the weather channel, whether it was that music video, whatever these things, and as you see, these are all colors that were picked from the Paintbox menu.
Yeah.
All that stuff literally infected our brains and realized, okay, this is the aesthetic that the Paintbox defined those aesthetics of the 80s. And obviously there's bad design, good design, etc. Or period design, we should say. But you know, look at all those are all done on the Paintbox. Like nobody would know that. And it's, you know, it's fantastic to reveal this influence that the Paintbox had, but actually Paul Keller and all these little modest guys in England who, you know, the company doesn't really effectively exist anymore, they're like, "Hey, you know, we just did it, like, you know, it was fun and we invented these things and, you know,
but
it was
it
great."
influenced so many people, right? And so many creators and graphic designers over the years,
Right.
and still to this day, you know, having it in here and artists being able to play with
So all the
it.
graphics that we got used to were all done on the Paintbox. So you saw better graphics, and for instance, Quantel were the first company, computer company, digital arts, etc., that basically you could buy 1,000 genuine fonts. There wasn't bit streams that you could have, chirons that were like similar to Helvetica.
Right,
You got real Helvetica,
Right.
and they paid the companies, digital licensing money to do that. So there's lots of, again, it doesn't make a difference at first, but I think they're a really good, ethical, revolutionary company that really affected this. But again, nobody knows, and everyone kind of assumes everything kind of started in about 1990 with Photoshop or whatever.
Well, speaking about ethics and Photoshop, Quantel sued Adobe in the 1990s, arguing that Photoshop copied many of its patented image processing techniques. The case was ultimately unsuccessful, but do you think Quantel's contributions to digital imaging have been underappreciated? And that's to everyone.
Well, so basically, again, if you patented something in England, you didn't necessarily know what was going on in the New York Institute of Technology in the research department.
Sure, yeah.
So it's not, even though you might have visited that department, there's a discussion about Quantel who had the technology and wanted this software to do a paint system, and thought, oh, we'll just go to America and see what they're doing there, and we'll buy software for our machinery. And they actually went and thought, well, actually, we can do it better ourselves. So, which they did, ultimately. Now, it was kind of, Quantel only ever sued two people. One was like a direct, in 30 years, one was a direct rip-off kind of Paintbox, cheaper, of course. And then the other was Adobe. There you go, that's the case.
Yeah.
And that was 96. And actually, the marketing guy said, well, actually, Adobe Photoshop's doing a good thing in a way. It's showing that there's a use for digital manipulation and a market for it. And there'll always be the people that pay. April Greenman called, the Mac, and said the Mac is trying to emulate what the high-end paint boxes can do.
That's right.
So Quantel had kind of laid down the groundwork, etc. It was obviously $250,000. It was never going to survive that. So they sued them, and they sued them on 5 different patent things that they had, the pressure-sensitive pen. Now, Adobe, now bear in mind, you've got Adobe, Alvy Ray Smith and all, there was a key witness, David M.
That's cool.
They all know, well, because they said that paint couldn't do painting, and David M. showed a 256 color picture of the Mona Lisa and said,
Amazing.
is this art? And so didn't work too well. But yeah, basically you've got, Apple gave them free lawyers. So it was, I wouldn't say it was ganging up, but there's obviously this thing of Silicon Valley versus this annoying British company. And really they didn't prove that Adobe didn't prove that they copied what Quantel did. They just proved that other people were doing what Quantel had a patent on beforehand. Not even commercially, just as a research or whatever. So once you do that, your patent fails. So I think ethically, they didn't really, I mean, we know Adobe, right? They shut down Corel Draw, they shut down all these things. They're horrible, big monopolistic companies. So who sued all sorts of people, FTC, So, compared to Quantel, Quantel are not a litigious company and really didn't sue anyone, as I say, for the pressure-sensitive pen. And Adobe didn't prove that he copied it, they just proved that Quantel shouldn't have the patents.
But one fun fact I would like to mention to everyone is that Adobe, for their early advertisements in the 90s, used Quantel Paintbox to make those advertisements.
I think it's on the end here, yeah. There was a guy who, Electric Paint it's called, in Los Angeles, and they literally were the first commercial Photoshop kind of place. They did all movie posters and Silence of the Lambs, all that kind of stuff. And I met the guy, and he was showing me some of the work, and he said, this is the piece of work I absolutely hated. And I said, why? He said, the ad agency came and said, we're doing an ad for Photoshop, and we want to have this field, and then there's a building in this field. We'll show how we can Photoshop this building into this field. I think it was 93. And they said, well, why don't you do it on Photoshop? He said, well, it can't do it yet. But by the time the ad comes out, we're hoping they'll work out the software to do it. So, you know, he said that was like, wow. And it was obviously, I mean, everything has like a, you know, Motorola comes and goes, Nokia comes and goes. Everything has its moment and moves forward. There's nothing wrong with Adobe existed, Apple, all these companies, etc. It's all part of a progression. But what's weird is that, and they say obviously the loser, you know, gets the winner gets to write history. That literally Quantel has been forgotten in art history, and that is what we're trying to do now. Is just go, yeah. When you look at this, we don't even need to tell you, but hey, Photoshop wasn't around, so what did do that digitally? And so that's the nice thing to like show people that actually there was this thing that existed that actually was really kind of cool and influential. And you know, there's all sorts of stuff, you know, art and graphics and whatever done on it. But hey, let's just fill in this gap of the 80s with, and this is part of the story, but this story of this company and this machine. And that's what's really cool.
Can I ask a question on that topic? Did Quantel ever try to make a civilian version of the Paintbox? Like,
So people in the late 90s would, and Mitch Mitchell, for instance, from MPC, you know, quite often people would say to Paul and Richard, who ran Quantel, why don't you just do like everyone else and sell software in a box?
It's very different though than a hardware dedicated.
No, yeah.
So Paul would say, even in the late 90s, any PC or Mac couldn't run as fast as the Paintbox could. And then the other thing is, he said, see this factory, we have like 800 workers here working that have made this company successful. Why am I going to replace all those people with somebody sticking CDs in a box? And so they also have like certain ethics and business. You know, both bosses quit because bankers took over and said, hey, you're not running it properly. They said, well, you run it, you're the bank, you know.
There's also something so different between like B2B and B2C companies. They were,
exactly.
Yeah, but that's boring business speak. So one
Hey,
last
Shark
question
Tank all of a
for
sudden.
one last question for all of you that's related to this is that like what are tools that you think feel like they're deeply influenced that you went on to use for digital painting, like Procreate, Wacom tablets, for example. I think of Quantel Paintbox, like that are Apple Pencil, like you're using now. Do you see those direct lineages?
yeah, of course, it's related. I mean, I'm fully fluent in, you know, the Adobe suite. I work as a working graphic designer today. I have clients. I do a lot of creative work. And I work a lot in Illustrator, believe it or not. I don't work with the Wacom as much. I actually want to play around with that. It's on my to-do list, but I work, I also still make a hybrid between analog collage work and Photoshop and Illustrator. I was lucky enough to be commissioned to do a very big mural in the UK at a rock festival, and I designed that with, believe it or not, digitized part of analog collage work out of my art studio and Photoshop and Illustrator all put together. So I guess that's my legacy on that.
So unless you have the answer to that, are you on the other side of things, like actually using these tools? Or?
Unfortunately, no. I'm not. I didn't get the visually artist gene, but I do use Photoshop from time to time. But yeah.
But Richard was, I think, one of the pioneers of doing what we call digital art now. Fidget, he was fidgeting. But yeah, because of resolution or whatever, he would do 3 feet or 4 feet high pieces of art, which obviously 65 lines wouldn't go, but then paint over it. So he was combining those two things, which I think, you know, I don't know, do you think what would Richard be using now, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, he sounds like he was interested in technology in general, like, in his relationship with Warhol. Like, he probably would have embraced the Adobe suite himself, right?
Oh, 100% sure that he would, absolutely. And, you know, especially with AI now, he would love to, you know, dive in and be a part of that. But yeah, to Adrian's point, so a lot of the images that you see here, in fact, all of them are very large works of canvas. So Richard would create them natively on the Photoshop, on the Quantel Paintbox rather.
See how they Photoshop in my head.
See how
Who?
Right.
Banning that word, no.
And then he would output that, and he would silk screen them, and he would paint on top of it as well. So I think he would absolutely embrace new technology today.
So I wanted to talk about the archive to kind of close this out. Adrian, you've dedicated a significant effort to preserving Paintbox archives. Given that the hardware was proprietary, emulation can be difficult, what challenges do you face in making this history accessible? You care so much about it being usable by artists, which is so special. Have you had any major discoveries that have changed your perception of Paintbox's role in digital art history in that way, in this kind of tangible conservation way?
I mean, I knew nothing about how the hardware would work. You know, like you, I just use this thing, right?
Yeah.
So I've had to learn, thanks to people like John, who helped me get one of the paint boxes going, you know, who used to work back in the day. So there's a whole world, but actually it's an entertaining world, because I'm not a technical person, but for instance, Alec Corley, who designed the soft, you know, wrote the code. And you know, there's a thing on there called color fettle, and I was like, Alec, what's color fettle? He said, oh well, when you've got an old sculpture and you got the lines on it from the casting, you knock that off. So we kind of thought, well, it's kind of your fettling an image, you know, it's like an old English word, and it says try it and do it and stuff. But I was in the code and I was trying to work out that you can't take a picture off a paint box and put it anywhere else. It's a specific type of software. And I was looking at the file name and I said, oh, it's a .afs. What's a .afs? And he said, well, it's Alec's file system. I invented it, so I get to call it Alec's file system. And you know, as much as that's like frustrating because you spent a day Googling for .afs, what the hell, and no one's ever heard of it. You know, also at the end of it, you get the answer and you just go, oh, that's really funny, actually. So it's been, you know, interesting to learn that side, and there's like a small community of people that are restoring them, did used to work on them, etc., which is fantastic. It's like a little, you know, everyone's keen to help each other. There's something about the paint box that everybody just likes it, right? It's not.
Everyone likes it.
It's not, you know, it's not like modern technology. It's not trying to save your data. It's not, you know, it just was there like a puppy to play with you know. Hey, it just makes you happy.
Yeah.
And everyone I see, you know, use this, including some of you today, you know, for the first time or even just going back on it. Everyone, it just makes them happy and smile, and it's like, you know, that's quite intoxicating. That not only I'm polishing the gravestone, so to speak, of this history of all these people that did this stuff, whether it's artist, technology, but the new people that are going on it, you know, just, especially in the world we're living in, you know, what else that's like, you know, you just go on it and you're just happy, you know, there's no, you switch it off and then that's it. So that's a really nice thing that I feel privileged that I've ended up in that position just by basically being a bit Tom Cruise-y about, hey look, there's a paintbox. It's taking about 3 years, but obviously, see this, MoMA Reject, if you're watching MoMA, the head of photography at MoMA, I said, I've got the whole birth of digital photography, examples, whatever, the artwork for the swimming baby, for Nirvana, or whatever, and literally she said, we have no interest whatsoever. And I said, I've made a t-shirt for you. But what's nice is that people are understanding, you know, like at Tate Modern, we did something there. It's not that people object against it, but they just don't know. So bringing that back out, and then, you know, basically there'll be all sorts of people like yourselves who take it further than I could, like Roger and Tezos and Georg. Obviously, I couldn't put all this together, but they see it and then take it even further. So you know, I'm in this privileged bit where I've managed to say that people contact me and say, hey, I've got this, I found this in the attic, do you want this? John gave me a little, you know, zip drive today with Quantel's written on. I know it sounds a bit sad, but like, it's really nice because he's like, you'll look after it, it'll be in your little thing. And also my stuff will all go in a museum. You know, I'm 60, so my life's ebbing away. You know, it'll go in a museum somewhere. So it's nice that all these people that were on it and in their 70s, and it'll just get thrown out. Like my archive would have got thrown out.
Well, many have, right? How many Quantel
Exactly.
Paintboxes were there around every broadcast station in the
Yeah,
United States?
there was at least like 4,000 paint boxes, and there's about less than 20 left now.
Well, I hope everybody hears this panel and understands this is an important part of digital art history. And we have some time for questions if you have them, but thank you.
Yeah. This question, I had this question kind of early on in the conversation, but I felt the point you made about how unforgiving Paintbox could be and the lack of undo button. And given the fact that it was so unforgiving and it was so expensive to purchase, I was wondering how you began learning how to use Paintbox and how you got your first reps in the tool.
Well, I was really lucky because Quantel, there was, as you point out, there's a shortage of access to it. Either at NBC, couldn't go on it because of the union, or BBC or whatever. So Quantel understood that, so they gave actually free paint boxes to 9 different art colleges in the UK, and that's how I ended up on the one that came to my college. So it was only coincidence really that it came. Or generally, there was a guy at my college, which is kind of a good story. A guy at my college, and like me, he loved the paint box, so he did what everyone who loved the paint box to do, and that was he cut a key for the paint box room. He got the key for the paint box room and then went to the locksmiths and got a copy and would sneak in the college at night and just really great. I've got all night on this, and get his fish and chips and just be working all night. So eventually the college found out, and he got thrown out of college. So he went to London the next week, and he went to a post-production company and said, "Hey, I can work the paint box, you got any jobs? Great, come on Monday morning." Went on Monday morning. Okay, this is the tech we've got. How are your skills? Okay, did them a demo. They said, "Right, okay, you're hired. It's 12 o'clock. We're all going to the pub, but we've got this video. Could you just put these little scratchy, sparkly effects on this video at these points? And we'd be back up after 3 o'clock, from the pub." He got that. And that was Queen, It's a Kind of Magic. And that was his first job, to just do the squiggles on it. We're all going to the pub, because that wasn't even a big deal. It's a Queen video. Hey, we have $1 million cigarette advertising things. So it was kind of weird. You either fell into it, you were lucky, you were in a company. If you were in NBC, you obviously had this battle between the engineers and creatives using it. But this is the thing, even though it's unforgiving, I can guarantee if you after this want to go on it, within 5-10 minutes, you feel happy on that machine. So Quantel said that the training period for the paint box was 3 years and 1 day. And that was 3 years at art college, and you come 1 day to Quantel, we teach you how to use it, and actually it's only half a day because we go to the pub. So that was it. You didn't need, it was your artistic ability that was important. Paintbox didn't make you an artist, it just helped you. So if you're a bad artist, it made you a good artist. But yeah, it was so easy to use. How many times we've heard tonight, intuitive, right? And you see the user interface, there's no strange words, you didn't have to type code or know any software. So the answer is it was just really easy to pick up, if you were lucky enough to get access to one.
To your knowledge, has anyone ever used it to create video games or anything interactive that's playable?
Yes, and I'd have to look it up because I was trying to find. Hang on, I'll tell you which one. There was one of the Atari games that was done on paint. That was done with Paintbox. Oh my daughter's got my phone. But yeah, one of the Atari games actually in California. There was. I can't remember which Atari game it was. Go on Discord and find out. Just search Atari on Google that. We'll give you the answer in a minute. But yeah, it seemed weird because obviously things like Tekken and all that Mortal Kombat, because they're video clips, or even using it for storyboards and stuff like that. The Paintbox was also really good to use for storyboards. That Max Headroom title you would do all your storyboarding first on a Paintbox, and probably even for movies and stuff like that, because you can visualize things a
We
lot
would do
quicker.
we would do builds on that, where, again, it was like a fake sitcom opening, so you boom, boom, boom. Like the whole build would be done on the Paintbox.
Right. So that's another aspect of but yeah, gaming. I mean, there was a lot of money in it, but I think gaming also had developed in the 70s. So I think it was his own niche market with people that worked with certain tech, etc. So I think the Paintbox, by the time it came out, they didn't really need it because they'd done all that stuff, right, without it.
Question. One more question, if anybody has.
Any more questions?
I'll take one. Yes, quick question. With Rafik Nadal, he's opening a museum in LA. I didn't know if your appetite was still to perhaps place some of this early digital work, just insofar as I know that he's kind of at the forefront of what's now, but I feel, having interviewed him, he potentially would see some value/interest in kind of helping to show the lineage.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing because it's all, all this is all about awareness, right? I'm pretty sure 6 months ago, none of you had heard of Paintbox, and you're like, well, this is a fascinating story, right? I mean, it's not like I'm trying to tell you like some boring story. It's got loads of aspects to it. So it's all about awareness. Now, the good thing is that you've got people like Hockney and Herring, and you say, hey, you can use the same machine that Herring used or whatever. And that's kind of a good hook to get people in. But I think until more people are aware of it and it's seen as a cool thing to do, but almost, that's kind of sad, right, that why that it should be seen. I'm just going to use it because Keith Haring used it, You should use it because, like any tool, because you want to do it, not because, obviously people, hey, I want to buy the first Apple Mac that Steve Jobs used or whatever, is kind of cool. But, it's a good selling point to it. But I think this traction that's building up, I don't be weird, but if I came here 3 years ago and said to Steve, hey, there's a thing called a Paintbox, they'd be like, yeah, whatever. But now there's this. So I see it only snowballing that you're all interested, you're going to take something away from this, whatever it is, and run with it, tell your friends or whatever, and that's what all this is about, the awareness really. And yeah, just making, relationships as well. This story and relationships and the humans behind it. This, as much as we talk about the tech, this isn't a story about tech, it's a story about artists and culture and relationships and society. And that's always a better story, right? Yeah.
Pop culture, history.
But I'm biased.